traditional university. I still remember ma'am telling me when I visited her chamber once. I was from this traditional university of West Bengal, and I was really in a new background, and I was really bewildered. And she said, "You will do wonderful. Don't worry." And that thing, even I remember today. And yes, I have ma'am again, and I'm really happy to welcome her. Just a brief introduction. I am sure most of you know about her, but then again, for the ones who have joined, just recently. So Dr. Sangeeta Laha has done her master's in Pol Science, MBA in Marketing, LLB and LLM from Patna University. She has also been awarded with her PhD degree from the University of Calcutta. Currently, she is pursuing her postdoctoral program. She has also published a book which has been published by Satyam Law International, Women in Legal Profession, in reference to Indian context. She was assistant professor in WBNUJ's Kolkata and CNLU Patna and has worked in Amity University Lucknow as professor and deputy director. Currently, she is an associate professor, law, and dean faculty of NLU Ranchi since 2018. She has presented and published several research papers and articles in journals of national and international repute. So she's our speaker today, and also into legal world as a platform. We have given ma'am the opportunity, and I mean, every day, and after the webinar, last webinar, we have been told that how she presented this beautiful webinar. Just a small request to all the audience out there. You can post your questions after 40 minutes of this session, because it is very difficult to answer your questions every now and then. So let ma'am finish the webinar, and after 40 minutes, you can put your questions in the chat live section. So you can do that. Also, you do not have to mark your presence or absence in this webinar, because this is not important in this webinar. But please be here and listen to ma'am, because this is the part two and the most important part. I think you should all listen to. So over to you, ma'am.
Good evening, and thank you, Anvesha. Good evening, all of you, that you have taken out time to participate and hear me in this webinar. And thank you once again to Anvesha and the team who has given me an opportunity to talk something that is not only of great concern, but in this busy, cosmopolitan, busy life, in the fast and busy lives of the people that is affecting in everyday life, is the worrying sign, is the number of matrimonial disputes we are having every day. And not only in the pre-lockdown period or prior to COVID-19 pandemic, we have also seen across, and I've also mentioned in my last session, that the rates of matrimonial disputes is rising, and it may be due to many reasons. Now, the data furnished, I could get one of the recent datas that was furnished by the Express News Service in regard to Kochi in Kerala, is that they have witnessed 3,122 divorce-related petitions in 2019, while in the first 24 days of 2020, a total number of 226 divorce petitions were filed before the family court. So what we find from 2018, that total about 2,948 while in 2017, the number stood as 2,517. So in the last 3 years, just in the city of Kochi, what we witness, or what our observation is, that the divorces are on the rise. This is just in the data which I'm just giving you in just one family court in the entire country of India. And you know, India is a big, big country with such a huge population. So you can jolly well understand the rate of matrimonial disputes in India. Now, this is a matter of concern. And because this is a matter of concern, I thought I must have a second session on the practical aspects of marriage laws in the teeth of the fact, because this is an important section for graduating law students or just new law students or who are aspiring to be judicial officers as to how to deal with such matrimonial cases. Now, for us, marriage for Hindus or maybe Muslims or maybe Parsis or maybe Sikhs or maybe Jains or Buddhism, whosoever religion one follows, marriage is a great part of the society. And even in a patriarchal society, marriage for Hindus, even for Christians, was considered to be a sacrament. And because it was considered to be a sacred, the Shastric Hindu law regarded marriage as one of the essential samskars. What does samskars means? It is a sacrament for every Hindu. So every Hindu must marry. Because it's a samskar, it was one of the categories of samskar. It is required that every Hindu must marry. The Vedas ordains and says that dharma must be practiced by man together with his wife and offspring. And you must have witnessed whenever there is a puja ceremony in a home or in a temple, it is generally the husband and wife who perform the puja together. So marriage right from the beginning for Hindus was considered to be a sacrament. Now, what are the sacramental aspect of marriage? What do we understand by that? First, it means it just not only gratifies one's physical needs, but it's primarily meant for the performance of religious and spiritual duties. So I gave you one of the examples. Whenever we have a puja, a home in our house, what we find is the partners, the husband and wife, they perform the home or the puja together. Then it is what is the second fact? It entered, once it is entered into marriage, it cannot be dissolved on any ground whatsoever. Third, a sacramental union also means that it is a union of soul, body, and mind. So it is from bed to board. Once you enter into the marriage is goes till the death of the person. So for Hinduism, actually the separation from the marriage or the break from the marriage was not recognized. But later on, when the society started changing, the concept changing, is what we find is that there has been a turn from the sacramental feature to the break feature. And why? And this breaking of the marriage, that is divorce earlier, that was not recognized earlier prior to 1955. After the legislation was brought into 1955, that is the Hindu Marriage Act, what we find is it speaks about the dissolution of marriage. So now the sacramental aspect of marriage has also made a turn to the breakdown of marriage. So the concept of marriage started changing, and what we find that Section 5, read with Section 7 of the Hindu Marriage Act, brought the earlier concept of the sacramental feature. And what does Section 5 says? Section 5 established that monogamy is the rule. So if the spouse, neither party must have a spouse living, which means if the parties enters into a marriage, neither the husband nor the wife must have a spouse living. Subsection 2, clause 2 of talks about the mental capacity of the parties concerned, and it says, at the time of the wedding, that is at the time of the marriage, neither party is incapable of giving a valid consent in consequence of unsoundness of mind, though capable of giving a valid consent, has been suffering from mental disorder of such a kind or to such an extent as to be unfit for wedding and for procreation of children. And third, of course, is subject to recurrent attacks of insanity and epilepsy. Also, epilepsy is now considered to be a curable disease. Now, fourth, I'm not going into third because it talks about ages of the parties, and all of you know what is the marriageable age, that is 21 and 18, that is recognized under Indian law. Fourth talks about degree of prohibited relationship, And fifth talks about Sapinda relationship. So the set of rules has already been told. uh, I think one person is mating. If you can put him in, he's from Bangladesh. So please put him in. He's just, I think. So the set of rules that has been followed in Hindu law has been laid down and valid marriage. Now, in contravention of clause 1, 4, and 5, when it contravenes that, or it is in contravention to section 7 of the Hindu Marriage Act. Section 7 talks about customary rites and ceremonies of either party to be performed, and it includes Saptapadi also. And what is Saptapadi? It is the 7 steps before that fire when the parties make a round. Now, in contravention of these rules, the aspects that has been laid down in the Hindu Marriage Act, what happens is the marriage is said to be a void one. So what actually we understand by void marriage is something commonly people say it is an illegal marriage. Though for law students or lawyers or for academicians like us, we say it is a void marriage. So what do we understand by a void marriage? It is actually a synonym of the word illegal. And what are the consequences of such an illegal marriage is, for example, A and B, I give you an example. If they enter into matrimonial relationship with each other with their own consent or may not have the consent of the parents, but they are major, can it be said to be an illegal marriage? No, it cannot be said to be an illegal marriage simply because the parents have refused to give their consent. But when A and B already had a married partner, they are married, and they say they had C and D, or either A or B is married to someone else, then in such a consequence, if A and B being married marries for the second time, when the partner, when their spouse is still living, then such a marriage, that second marriage is said to be a void one. Why it is said to be a void one? Because it is in contravention to subsection 1 of section 5, which talks about that neither party must have a spouse living. So what I'm trying to make you understand is clause 1 makes contravention of clause 1 makes a marriage void. Contravention of clause 4, that is prohibited degree of relationship. Now, what do we understand by prohibited degree of relationship? Some relationships are prohibited by nature. Let's say spouses are related to each other through linear ascendance, either from the father's side or from the father's side, then the marriage between them may be void. So certain relationships are said to be prohibited relationship. Also, if certain relationship falls within the Sapinda relationship, and what is Sapinda relationship? Most of the law students must be knowing. It extends to the 5 generation from the male side, and it extends to the 3 generation from the mother side, including the person concerned. So from the father side, it will be the person who is included, his father and grandfather, great grandfather and great great grandfather. So we are having 5 degree of linear ascendant. In the mother side, it will be the person's mother and grandmother, 3 degrees from the person concerned. So any relationship that falls within the Sapinda relationship, such a marriage is said to be void. So we cannot think of such a marriage. Can you think of marry your own first cousin or second cousin? No, you cannot marry your uncle's son, your chacha's son, or chachi's daughter. You cannot marry your mama's son or maternal aunt, Mercy's son or daughter. No, you cannot, because there are certain relations which are prohibited, failing which it becomes a void marriage. So we were discussing now the grounds of void marriage. Now, what this is the civil consequences. Now, therefore, the man who marries for the second time, he commits such a marriage, he commits bigamy, and neither of the spouse, if the spouse has a if the earlier spouse is still alive, then he can also be prosecuted under penal provisions. So these are some of the restrictions, some of the barriers that one cannot marry as per Hindu law, and therefore marriage is said to be void. Now, what are the other essential elements what are the important questions that relate to void marriages? Now, some questions might go in your mind is what are the provisions relating to maintenance of a wife in void marriages? And what happens if a children is born from a void marriages? Now, void marriages, we have two sections that attract here. One is section 11 and section 12. Now, section 11 gives the degree of nullity, that you don't have to, it nullifies the marriage. Since the marriage, such a marriage is not recognized in Hindu society, neither morally nor legally, the wife doesn't fall under the definition of wife because it is non-est in the eye of law. But for precaution says, the law says that it is better to get a decree of nullity. Since it is a void marriage, the court can nullify the marriage by granting a decree of nullity, though it is not an essential requirement, but as a precautionary measure, you can always advise your client to go for a decree of nullity under section 11 of the Hindu Marriage Act. Now, two questions just now I told you comes in your mind at what happens if a wife who solemnizes marriage with the man who is already married. And what happens to her? Because her marriage, as per section 5, subclause 1, becomes a void marriage. So does she get the status of a wife? That's the first prime question that may hit you. And you may also get several cases you may encounter when she may come up with a story and say that she was deceived. She didn't knew that the man whom she had solemnized the marriage already was a married one. So what happens to her? So what are the provisions? The first thing is that you can first is, can she go for maintenance or not? I mean, that's the first thing you have to look into. Now, how is maintenance, or what does maintenance means, and how it is defined in legal terms? Now, the provision for maintenance means that the husband is required to make provisions for food, clothing, residence, education, and medical attendance and treatment of the person concerned. Maintenance necessarily must encompass a provision for residence also, because you don't know where the wife will be living. Now, if she already comes to know that he has already a wife from his prior marriage, he already has a wife or a child, it is but natural she might get agonized and she might leave the residence. So where will she go? So maintenance to such a lady can live in a manner more or less to which she's accustomed to. So to the status she belongs, maintenance amount has to be given. What I'm trying to say is the concept of maintenance therefore includes the provision for food, clothing, and the like, and take into account the basic need of the person concerned. And what does sustenance means here? Sustenance of a wife or maintenance of a wife for her sustenance does not mean any animal existence, or you give some amount of money and you wash away your hand. No, that cannot be the case. It signifies a leading life in a similar manner as would have lived in a house of a husband. Therefore, husband has got a duty bound to enable his wife to live her life of dignity according to their social status. And there has been a Supreme Court decision reported in 2015. The party's name is Bhavan Mohan Singh versus Meena, SCC 2015, volume 6, SCC at page 353. So you can look it into case. It will help you when such a client, that is the hapless client, the victim is coming to your place, asking you as to what she should do, where to file a case, what remedy, what relief she can get and you are the person who have to give the remedy concern. Now, as you know, maintenance is of two kind. What it is of two kind? One, you have the interim maintenance. And what is that interim maintenance? It is an amount that is to be paid to the person who is filing of the petition, that is from the date of petition till the dismissal of the suit. So that is maintenance, interim maintenance, and this amount includes expenses of the proceeding as well as other expenses during the course of proceeding. For example, filing of the suit, court fee, daily expenses, fees of the lawyers from time to time at hearing. All this includes interim maintenance. And what is permanent maintenance? Permanent maintenance is to be paid by one party to the other after the judicial proceeding that results in the dissolution of marriage or judicial separation. So permanent maintenance either may be a fixed amount, quite a huge amount, and an alimony that has to be paid by the husband to the wife. Now we have got two sections that attracts here. Now under which section you can file a case. I'm sure many of you must be knowing, but just a recap of it is Section 24 of the Hindu Marriage Act. Now this section is a balanced section. Why do I say this section? It is not that the wife can only claim maintenance. It can also be vice versa. A husband who has got no means to sustain himself, and if the wife is having a sufficient means and she is financially independent, then he can also claim maintenance for her. So it talks about maintenance, that how a wife or the husband can claim interim maintenance. It is only under Hindu Marriage Act and Parsi Marriage Act, both husband and wife can claim for interim maintenance. While in any other statutes, for example, for Christians, only the wife can claim interim maintenance. And you can look into Section 36 of the Divorce Act, where the wife may file for a petition of interim maintenance. This is in respect to Christians, Christian couples. Now, Section 25 of the Hindu Marriage Act deals with the concept of permanent maintenance, which is an amount that a person has to pay to another person, that is to the spouse, as maintenance, either in gross sum, I said, which is a huge amount, or periodically or monthly, as the court may order in that case. So maintenance is permanent maintenance is after the proceeding gets over. A lump sum money, or it may be by way of a lump sum money, or it may be by a monthly allowances, or it may be by a period allowances, as soever the court has directed. Now the significant question now, what I'm coming into is that arises is whether the wife whose marriage is void under Section 11 of the Act, can she claim maintenance from her husband of that void marriage? Now I'm going to cite some Supreme Court decisions that will help you in drafting your case for maintenance. The Supreme Court in such a circumstances has held that where a marriage is void, wife cannot claim maintenance under Section 125 of the CRPC. Why she cannot claim under 125 of the Section CRPC? Because there the definition of wife is legally wedded wife. So wife of void marriage who does not get the status of the so-called wife cannot claim maintenance under Section 125 of the CRPC. However, it has been generally accepted rule that even in such cases, the wife is entitled to maintenance under Section 18 of the Hindu Adoption and Maintenance Act. So what is Section 18 of the Hindu Adoption and Maintenance Act of 1956? Just a cursory glance you may have on it. It says, subsection 1 of Section 18 says, the wife is entitled to get maintenance amount from a husband until she dies or he dies, if she lives separately from her husband under the following ground. So if she moves out from the husband's home, husband residence, and for justifiable reasons, she is living separately. What are the reasons? When the husband is liable for desertion, when the husband has been liable. That means he has met her with cruelty, or the husband has deserted her, or the husband is suffering from with such a disease in a communicable form, or the husband has actually is liable for bigamy when he has solemnized the second marriage, but has not stated the truth to the second wife, or he converts to some other religion without the consent of the wife. So the wife can claim maintenance under Section 18 uh, of the Hindu Adoption and Maintenance Act only if these conditions are fulfilled. Now, therefore, these are some of the remedies that are available to the wife, that is a wife of a void marriage. Now, I'll talk about section maintenance given as an award to wife under section 23 subsection 2 of the Hindu Adoption and Maintenance Act. Now, just to have a relook on what the section 23 says, section 23 of the Hindu Adoption and Maintenance Act defines the people who can claim the maintenance and how the maintenance can be calculated. So what are the yardsticks actually on which the court has to decide the amount of maintenance to be given to the wife? And the analysis factor of the amount are: number one, please remember this, status and position of the parties. So if the wife comes from a good status, from a hi-fi status, the amount has to be fixed. Likewise, two, the basic necessity of the claimant, which includes food, clothing, shelter, medicine, education, etc. The basic comfort which a reasonable man or a woman needs, a reasonable person needs. Fourth, the value of the property, whether movable and immovable, of the person concerned. The income of the party concerned, that is the income of the husband. The number of members who are dependent on the wife, if not, she's financially sound. And these are some of the yardsticks on which the court has to decide the quantum of maintenance. And as I told you, under section 25(1), which gives an explanation, wife includes a woman who has been divorced by or has obtained a divorce from her husband and has not remarried. So divorced wife can also claim maintenance from her husband. It is not that wife whose marriage is subsisting, who has separated out, not living with her husband, not only she can file a case. It's not that deserted wife or abandoned wife or hapless wife or neglected wife can claim a maintenance. It is also that a wife who has already got a decree of divorce can also claim maintenance. So maintenance has not only to be given just to legally wedded wife. Now, what about the maintenance to the second wife? In a very important case of the Supreme Court that was delivered in 2014, the party's name is Badshah versus Urmila Badshah Godse, where the husband had concealed the subsistence of the earlier marriage while marrying the second wife. That is, the second wife is innocent. She doesn't know that her man has already married. He already has a first wife. Then if she can prove this fact, she's entitled to give maintenance. So the second wife can be treated as a legally wedded wife for the purpose of maintenance. And this is the case that has been reported in 2014, volume 1, STC at page 188. It's a very important case. The party's name, I repeat once again, Badshah versus Urmila Badshah Godse. So many a times you will encounter these type of matrimonial cases when the second wife has been duped. She doesn't know that her man who was actually alluring her already was a married man. And so therefore, when this lady has been duped, you can see the Supreme Court judgment and can draft the case accordingly. Also, wife who has been separated by mutual consent also can claim maintenance. The earning of the wife can also be taken into consideration, but wife income can be accounted for determining the maintenance But if she doesn't have a sufficient income, then also she is entitled to maintenance. Now, again, a new proposition we are encountering these days is women of live-in relationship. In my early discussion, as I told you, in many of the metro cities of India, and also among the youngsters, the new youth that is coming up, live-in relationship has has been recognized in India, and that is by the Domestic Protection of Women in the Domestic Violence Act. So live-in relationship, since live-in relationship has been recognized, women of live-in relationship can also seek maintenance. And in the last, there are two judgments I can cite before you. The latest is of Lalita Topo versus State of Jharkhand. See, 2018 SCC online, Supreme Court at page 2301. So a woman of live-in relationship can also seek maintenance. But woman, knowing very well, she's aware of the fact that she's in a live-in relationship with a married man. She already knows this man is married. In such a circumstances, a live-in relationship between an unmarried woman knowingly entering, she is fully aware of the fact, knowingly entering into relationship with a married male cannot be termed as a relationship in a nature of marriage, and her status would be that of a concubine or a mistress, and therefore she's not entitled for maintenance. So live-in relationship must somehow has to be established in a society that they're living as husband and wife and not undergoing concubinage. And the decision, I can quote the famous Supreme Court decision is Indra Sharma versus VKV Sharma, reported in 2013, volume 15 SCC at page 755. So there's a Katina, I've given you quite a lot of judgment. You can look into it, help your client, especially the hapless woman, when she comes to you seeking maintenance under the legislations we have. So these judgments will help you a lot. But what about the Muslim woman? So far Hindu is concerned, we say bigamy is an offense. It's an offense under civil law. It is an offense under Indian penal law also. But what happens to a Muslim woman? Because for a Muslim man, he can have wife up to 4. So what happens? A Muslim woman is entitled to maintenance under CRPC. Why under 125 CRPC? Because it is a secular law, irrespective of religion, whether a woman is a Muslim or a Parsi or a Christian or a Sikh. Any woman of any religion in India can file a case, a suit under section 125 of the CRPC. Why under 125 of CRPC? Because it gives a speedy remedy. Immediately you are giving a remedy to your client by way of this, by agitating the case under section 125 of CRPC. In Muslim law, we have a very famous landmark case, that is Muhammad Ahmad Khan versus Shabano Begum, reported in 1985, volume 2 SCC 556. And this is a famous case where the Shabano was seeking maintenance from her lawyer husband, who had a very good practice. He had abandoned her after 40 years of marriage. She already had 5 children. And because he had abandoned her, went and brought the second woman as his wife. It is where is the agitating point is where she filed a case under section 125 of the CRPC, also challenging the validity of triple talaq. So to some extent, the validity, the constitutionality of triple talaq way back from 1985 itself was questioned by the Muslim women. And at last what we find is in 2019 is the criminalization of triple talaq. That is the triple talaq bill. The act was passed making talaq al-biddat to attract penal provisions because it was highly misused. So anytime the Muslim man can divorce his wife, in such a circumstances, section 125 of CRPC can come into rescue. Also, under the Muslim Protection of Rights and Divorce Act, a Muslim woman can also claim maintenance from the State Waqf Board. So section 4 of the Muslim Women Protection of Rights on Divorce Act 1986, in the same proceeding, for maintenance can plead inability of her relatives to maintain her, and therefore relatives can be added as parties to the litigation if they have enough means to pay maintenance. And the case is the 1996 Supreme Court case, because in 1986 we have the Muslim Protection of Rights on Divorce Act, and this case is just 10 years after. The case party's name is TN Waqf Board versus Sayyid Fatima Nachi, reported in 1996, volume 4, SCC, at page 616. So you can see this case as to how the hapless woman, you can give relief to a hapless woman under Section 4 of the Dissolution of Muslim Protection Act. But Section 5 has been very cunningly drafted at that point of time. Rajiv Gandhi was the Prime Minister of India, and the Congress was the ruling government. So to woo the sentiments, Muslim sentiments, is Section 5 has been drafted very cunningly, which says that the consent of both the husband and the wife is required, whether they should go under section, they should agitate their claims under section 125 of the CRPC or under section 3 read by section 4 of the Muslim Protection of Rights and Divorce Act, Muslim Women Protection of Rights and Divorce Act. So that is a different story. I do not have sufficient time to explain you why it has been cunningly drafted. Obviously, it was to woo the sentiments of the Orthodox Muslim at that point of time after the Shah Bano case. You may also see the Daniel Latifi case, that is the Daniel Latifi versus Union of India, wherein it has been categorically stated that the husband is obliged to provide a reasonable and fair provision in addition to maintenance to contemplate the future need of ex-wife. And this case has been reported way back in 2001, volume 7 SCC at page 740. So two cases in Muslim law you can refer in Muslim law. One is the Shah Bano case and second is the Daniel Latifi case. The third case is Sabra Shameen versus Maqsood Ansari, reported in 2004, volume 9 SCC at page 616. It says, a divorced Muslim wife is entitled to maintenance not merely until the completion of iddat period. So there was a lot of controversy going on that up to the iddat period. What is the iddat period? Is the period that a Muslim woman has to undergo after she has been divorced, that is after she has been given talaq by a husband, and includes 3 lunar eclipses, that is 3 months, more or less you can take it as 90 days, or for a pregnant woman, it is until delivery. So the earlier personal law was, in Muslim law, how it was interpreted is that she can only be maintained up to iddat period. Now, what will happen to a woman after she undergoes the iddat period and still she doesn't remarry? She remains as a woman as she is, a talaq woman, a divorced woman. So, therefore, the Supreme Court in this case has said that she has to be maintained for her entire life until she remarries. So this is a very landmark judgment. You can look into it. When a Muslim woman, a Muslim client comes to you and seeks for a remedy, what you should do, which section you should file, which court is the right forum to file such a case, you should know as a law student. Thereafter, now the question is, this is as per the hapless woman, the woman is concerned. I've brought section 24 before you. I've brought section 25 of the Hindu Marriage Act before you. I've brought the Divorce Act before you. I've also brought, you can also refer to the Special Marriage Act, the sections on the Special Marriage Act, if the marriage has been performed or solemnized in a civil form. You can also see the Muslim Women of Protection of Rights and Divorce Act, the Dissolution of Muslim Marriage Act. So these are the legislation. It has to be on your fingertips when such a client comes to you. So this is one aspect of my lecture. The second is, what happens to the children of void marriages? Are they legitimate marriages or are they illegitimate marriages? Now, according to section of the Hindu Marriage Act, section 1955, that is section 16, it says that if a child is born out such of a wedlock, which is subsequently declared to be null and void, that child will not be considered as illegitimate, but he shall be considered legitimate despite the marriage being illegal from its inception. So what we see is that the children born of such a marriage that are void later, the question of legitimacy should be considered as if the child is a legitimate child and he has got all the rights that of a legitimate child. He can inherit even his parents' property, but he doesn't have the right to inherit his grandparents, that is ancestral property. So properties, as you know, is of two kinds. One is self-acquired and one is ancestral property. So in ancestral property, such a child from a void marriage cannot claim, but property from his parents, that is from his mother or from his father, he has all the right as a normal legitimate child. So Section 16 has bestowed legitimacy to such a type of children. Now, the third category, another category of marriage, which I'm going to discuss and which is very important for you to know, is mock and fraudulent NRI marriages. So we have seen a lot of women who have been abandoned. And I'll tell you one illustration that is especially in the state of Punjab. And there's a district, a place known as Jalandhar. It has got innumerable abandoned women from NRI marriages because NRI marriage sounds to be very rosy. It sounds as if the man has got a status. So compared to the Indian boys, many families prefer that their daughter should get an NRI groom. And what happened? I relate you a story. Gurmeet Kaur from Punjab, she got a shock of her life when she discovered the truth about her husband, whose name was Manjeet Singh, in 2000, whom she had married in 2000, thinking he was an NRI, settled in the US. He took from her parents 4.8 lakh of dowry and another 1.5 lakh from Gurmeet's relative while going abroad, promising to send her immigration papers. Fortunately and unfortunately, the papers never arrived to her. So thinking that Manmeet Singh is her husband who will send her papers, those papers never arrived. So what happens to her next? Instead, she learned that he's already married and also has a son from the first marriage. So see the shock of the life she gets. And he was not living in US, but he is an unskilled worker in Seoul. So when he visited Punjab and when she lived, he came out with 1,001 lies, duped her, got married, took money from the girl's parents, additional money for passage money to go back to his place and therefore never return back nor send any papers. Now, such type of clients you will encounter in day-to-day life, and it is happening. It is increasing by leap and bounds. Now, NRI marriages are no different from a normal Hindu marriage. And the acts they are governed again is Hindu Marriage Act, Special Marriage Act, Foreign Marriage Act, Parsi Marriage, Indian Christian Marriage Act, Indian Divorce Act, Adoption and Maintenance Act, and the Dissolution of Muslim Marriage Act. So these are the acts, like the normal marriages that happens in India, governs the NRI marriages. And over the years, what we have seen that the woman has been trapped by fraudulent NRI marriages, and they have been in an alarming proportion. So how do you qualify? Who qualifies an NRI? By the word itself, you may know they are non-resident Indian. So NRI, the word NRI has not been defined in any of the Indian legislations. But it has just been explained. Just an explanation of it is you will get in the Income Tax Act and in the FERA Act, which means an NRI means non-resident Indian who is a person who holds an Indian passport and immigrates to other countries either for the purpose of study or for the purpose of employment. So these NRIs have been spreading of over 2008 countries with a population of 3 crore 8,43,419. And this is the data. I haven't got the latest data. As such, the data bank is not is not with us, nor with the External Affairs Ministry as to how many NRIs have been settled abroad. But data, this I could get some 4 years back data. So it is now doubled. That 3 crore must have doubled to maybe to 5 crores. And NRI does not mean NRI of USA and UK. You have got a lot of all countries where Indian population have gone and settled there, professing Buddhism, Christianity, Islam, Jainism, Judaism, Sikhism, Zoroastrianism, Baha'is, Hinduism, etc., etc. So you will find lot of such high-class Indian women looking for NRI bridegroom, and you have got lot of these matrimonial portals. Please be careful of the matrimonial portals. Before looking into the matrimonial portals, see the genuineness of the person concerned. There are a lot of fake matrimonial portals that have come up. Or suddenly they come to know that he's already entangled with some other woman. Then there is also a delay for getting immigration. There are ex parte divorces. Now, divorces is very easy in foreign countries. And that divorce order is not applicable to Indian law. So here comes the conflict of law, conflict in private international law. And the National Commission that helps in states that it is only after they come to know, only when the bridegroom, the parents do not verify the credentials, the background of the bridegroom, and he hurriedly in 1.5 months, the bridegroom says that he wants to go back to his working place, and hurriedly the marriage is performed. So National Commission for Women only comes to know after the marriage has taken place and the woman has been abandoned. So these are some of the common issues in NRI women for NRI marriages being abandoned even before the husband has taken her to a foreign country of his residence. Or you will find after a short honeymoon, he has went back promising her to send her tickets, and those tickets never came, flight tickets never came. Or in many instances, you will find the woman would already have been pregnant during the honeymoon period, and he has left. So both the child and the woman and the child have been abandoned, and they are in helpless situation. In many instances, you will find the husband has never called or wrote or never came back to take her. But on the other hand, the husband and the in-laws, so-called in-laws, have been demanding money from the helpless woman, or flatly have refused to give any help to such women. So these are some of the instances. As a lawyer, as a law student, you will come across of such incidents of hapless women. And therefore, I thought I must discuss this fraudulent marriages only with an objective, with a word of caution that you must, before performing or before going into an NRI groom, NRI so-called bridegroom, you must look into the credentials, and not who just gives a false information about his job, immigration status, earning, property. You have to look into all these material particulars before that marriage is performed. So in such circumstances, women of such marriages cannot get maintenance because the husband is actually staying abroad. So how that maintenance for Indian couples, fine, I've told you, there are so many sections. You have the courts before where the husband or the wife is residing, or whether they have last resided, that can be the jurisdiction. Either it may be before the family court or before the district court concerned, where you can file the case and you can get relief to such couples. But what happens in an NRI in an NRI marriage case? Can the woman claim maintenance? So a lot of issues are involved here. And just in Punjab, it has been found that more than 30,000 wives of NRIs have been deserted. So how do you help these such type of complaints? And the Wire, the data I gathered from the Wire, it reported on 12 September 2019, so just few months back. And as per their last census, they say, the Wire reports, there are 2.3 million separated and abandoned women in India. In absolute terms, that is more than 2 times the number of divorced women. So what you find is NRI women are more abandoned than divorced. That actually a woman from our country, that is from the couple who stays in India, who are Indian residents, it's more than that. And this is a very alarming proportion facing harassment and ill treatment. Now, what are the sections that get attracted in such type of marriages? That is, the common section is 494, section 494, and it talks about marrying again during the lifetime of husband or wife. So either for couples living in India or NRI grooms who had already had a marriage before, who has earlier has a wife living in his working place, also has got a son, again came to India and jolly well solemnized the second marriage. How can he be hooked? The section that is 498, 494, which states whoever having a husband or wife living marries in any case in which such marriage is void by reason of its taking place during the life of such husband or wife shall be punished with imprisonment of either description for a term which may extend to 7 years and shall also be life. So as a law student, you have to be aware, you must read this section again and again, read the ingredients of this section. That what are the ingredients? The ingredients, first you have, when such a case comes before you, when such a brief you are having to argue before the court, what have you to argue and convince the court? That there has been an element of deceit or fraudulent intention, and it has caused a false belief. And third, the cohabit or the person has cohabited or had cohabitation with the women concerned. And section 495 talks about concealment of former marriage. So 494, it is better to club 494 with 495 of the IPC, which says if the person, an offense, whoever commits an offense defined in the preceding section, having concealed from the person with whom the subsequent marriage is contracted the fact of the former marriage, shall be punished with imprisonment of either description with a term that may extend to 10 years and shall always be liable to fine. So 494 has to be clubbed with 495 of the IPC to prove a case. Apart from this, there are also section 494 that attracts adultery, and it says whoever has a sexual intercourse with a person who is and whom he knows or has reasons to believe to be the wife of another person without the consent or connivance of that man, such sexual intercourse not amounting to the offense of rape is guilty of the offense of adultery and shall be punished with imprisonment of either term which may extend to 5 years or with fine or with both. So adultery, to attract the sections of adultery, there has to be cohabitation. The woman must be married. It is in the knowledge. The consent or connivance of the husband is there, and it should not constitute rape. So this section can be attracted here. Other section is section 498, that is enticing or taking away or detaining with criminal intent a married woman. You are the guy concerned is either takes or entices away woman whom he knows or has reasons to believe to be a wife of any other man, from that man or from any other person, having the care of her on behalf of that man with intent that she may have illicit intercourse with any person. So these are some of the offenses where IPC gets attracted, and you have to be well aware, you have to be well equipped with what are the ingredients of this this section. Other ingredients are 498A, cruelty. You can file a case under 498A of the IPC. Cruelty, although not defined under Indian laws, but it is a cognizable, it is a non-bailable and non-compoundable offense defined in 20A of the IPC under section 498A. So you can hook the husband and his relative under 498A only if you want, if only the wife aggrieved or the complaint aggrieved wants to hook the person under criminal law. So for civil law is concerned, she can file a divorce under section 13 of the Hindu Marriage Act. And section 13, what does section 13 of the Hindu Marriage Act says? It says it says that now there are two type of divorces we have in Hindu law. One is, while the parties are mutually agreeing, and what the parties are mutually agreeing, that is without any, they do not want to contest the case, so it is a non-contested matter. And here you can advise a party to file a case under section 13B of the Hindu Marriage Act, that is both the parties are consenting to divorce each other. The other matter for divorce is on context. What is that is under contest, the parties are actually asking a divorce under section 13 of the Hindu Marriage Act. So contested cases are, one is the consented type of divorce, the other is the contested type of divorce. And under contested type of divorce, you have what are the grounds that get attracted under section 13 is cruelty, adultery, abandonment, that is desertion. The husband has deserted her without any reasonable cause for a period of 2 years, conversion, converted to some other religion, mental disorder, which cannot be cured, that is mental illness, disease and a communicable form, communicable disease, renunciation of the world, and also presumption of death. So if the spouse has not been heard for a period of last 7 years, it is presumed that it has been presumed to be a civil death. So in such a case, the wife can ask for divorce under Hindu Marriage Act. So these are some of the sections. These are, you have to read thoroughly. You have to know the basic ingredients to equip yourself to help the needy woman from leading a destitute life. Thank you. Over to Anvesha.
Yes, thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. The session was really wonderful. It was very informative. And if we can see the comments in YouTube, you will find out, ma'am, later that students have been enriched with the knowledge that you have always imparted. It's not new to me, but to others. Ma'am, we do have certain questions. Would you like to take them?
Yes, sure.
Yes.
Yes.
Ma'am, there is this question by Mohit Kaushik. What is the difference between dower and maintenance?
Oh, very good question. Now, maintenance, just now I told you, it is an amount to be paid by the husband to the wife on certain conditions. And it includes food, shelter, clothing, medicine, whatever the wife needs. Dower is the amount, it is also known as meher. And one is meher, it is a sort of a customary ritual in Muslim marriages. So meher amount, that is the dower amount, is to be paid at the time of marriage. That is the Muslim marriage when it is being solemnized. So dower amount is different from maintenance amount. Dower is one of the features that a Muslim husband has to pay to his wife at the time of marriage. And dower is of two kinds. One is prompt dower, which is paid at the time of marriage. And the second is deferred dower, which he can pay later on arising on certain contingency. Now, these contingency is actually to be decided by both the parties. Normally in Muslim law, two contingencies can happen to that Muslim woman. Either she gets divorced, that is the Muslim husband gives her talaq, or she dies. So in death, dower amount cannot be paid. When she has been given talaq by her husband, it is at that time of, at that point of time, whatever the deferred amount has been promised or that needs to be paid to the wife is that amount that has to be paid within that 3 iddat period. So before the wife is actually free from that marital relationship, the dower amount has to be paid. So dower amount is entirely different from the maintenance amount. I hope I have made you clear.
Yes, ma'am. The explanation is quite lucid. We'll go to the next question. It's a question from Kanika Mahajan. if a man renunciates the world, is he liable to maintain his wife and children?
No, of course, renunciation, the world is, in a way, he has become a sannyas. But the Hindu law is very clear. If he is a healthy man, if even if has renounced the world, he's become sannyas. He might be having sufficient property, might leave behind sufficient property. He might have some movable or immovable assets. In circumstances, if a healthy man, just because he has renounced the world, that cannot be an excuse for not neglecting his wife. So law is very clear. If you have the means, if you are a healthy person, you are well equipped, then in that case, you have to take care of his wife, because marriage is not a joke. It is not a one-day affair. It is the responsibility of the husband and vice versa to take care of each other. So you cannot afford to neglect your wife on the pretext that you have become a sannyasi. And Indian sannyasis are very rich.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
True. Yes, we have an example of Gaur Gopal Das too. In that
Yeah, so
respect.
in a lighter
Yeah.
vein, Indian sannyasis are not poverty-stricken or poor sannyasis. To my understanding, all of them are pretty rich. So one cannot make an excuse that he has renounced the world. Yes. Next
True,
question.
ma'am. Ma'am, there is this question by Priya Kapoor, whether the estimation of husband's income is permissible under Section 24 of Hindu Marriage Act.
Whether the
Estimation of husband's income.
Yes, the income of the husband has to take into consideration. But at the same time, if the husband is having a more income and wife is also from a good background, accordingly, as I told you, the magistrate has to weigh and mean, the judge has to weigh and mean as to what should be the yardstick on which the interim maintenance can be given.
Ma'am, according to this person of like Juhi Oja, she's asking you in present time, Hindu marriage is only sacrament or contract. What is your opinion?
No, Hindu marriage, as I told you earlier, was completely a sacrament. But till 1955, until and unless we had this legislation, that is the statutes that recognized Hindu marriages, dissolving a marriage or separating out of from the husband for a woman was out of question, because a woman once married always be a married woman. Though polygamy was a rule, polyandry was not a rule. A Hindu woman could not go for a second man in her life if her husband is alive, no matter she may be ill-treated or harassed. But polygamy was a rule. A Hindu man could have innumerable wives on a pretext of giving birth to a son. So from the first wife, if he doesn't have a son, he will go for the second wife and he'll say the first woman has already given the consent. So that is what the society was. But after 1955, when monogamy was established, monogamy became the rule for Hindu marriages, then in that case, the Hindu woman, we cannot go for from the sacrament got a twist, and the introduction of divorce under Section 13 of the Hindu Marriage Act brought a twist in the concept of Hindu marriage. So from sacrament, it became a sort of dissolve. It could be dissolved on the certain ground. So nowadays, what I find, my reading is it has the sacramental feature. Section 7 gives the sacramental feature that Saptapadi and all the customary rites have to be performed if the parties are Hindus and you are performing a marriage as per your own community. That is the customs of your community. So sacramental feature has been very well retained in Hindu law, but we have shifted towards the contract because marriage can also be dissolved. It can also be broken on the grounds mentioned in Section 13 of the Hindu Marriage Act. So it has got both the element, the sacramental element, as well as the contractual element also, though it is not purely contractual in nature. Next
Yes,
question.
ma'am. Ma'am, there is this question by Pooja Agarwal. She's asking you if initially the wife does not claim maintenance and her divorce proceedings are going on, can she claim maintenance now when the proceedings are still going on? Like initially she did not claim maintenance, but
Yes,
later
yes.
she wants to.
Maintenance amount, actually it is the wit of the lawyer. Even you cannot expect a wife to know everything about law. What you and Anvesha may have read in law books, that hapless woman may not be a law student. So if she has not claimed maintenance earlier, that is increments earlier, that means it is a folly on the part of the lawyer, advocate concerned, who has not been serious about her case. The first duty of the advocate or the lawyer is the moment he files a claim of maintenance or in any suit, it may be a suit for restitution of conjugal rights, it may be a suit for judicial separation, it may be a suit for divorce. The first thing he has to do is any of these suits, he has to file a case for interim maintenance. Otherwise, how will that wife fight that suit? So, ignorance of the lawyer cannot give an excuse to the party concerned that she cannot ask for maintenance. Even during the divorce proceeding, at a later stage, she may ask the court to give an interim maintenance, provided she doesn't have the means to carry or to fight that suit, to fight that litigation.
Okay, ma'am. Ma'am, there is this question by Legal School. If a woman has been forced in marriage, would it be a void or voidable marriage?
Now, forced in marriages, you have to, because generally the consent is required and the consent has to be a valid consent. And when the consent becomes not a valid consent due to unsoundness of mind or mental incapacity, all this has been mentioned in section 5. Now, whether she has been coerced into marriage, whether she has been forced into marriage, all these things have to be proved before the law to make the marriage. She may get a divorce, but it cannot be said a void marriage. I've already told you when the marriage becomes void. So consent, not giving a valid consent, doesn't make the marriage void. It makes, I suppose, to my understanding, it makes the marriage voidable. So please, I have to see once again, there's a difference. Void is only on 3 criteria. If the party must not have a spouse living, 2, the party should not be within the prohibited degree of relationship, and 3, the parties are not sapindas to each other. Otherwise, it becomes a voidable marriage. Option of the party whether to seek an annulment or not to seek an annulment.
Okay, ma'am. Ma'am, there's this question by Juhi Oja. Is registration of marriage mandatory when married couple is going to stay permanently in a foreign country after marriage?
Yes, of course. The Foreign Marriage Act bill, please read the Foreign Marriage Act bill, which is still pending. It was supposed to be passed just prior to the lockdown was announced. Surprisingly, it could not be passed. And in between, the minister who had placed the bill is late Mrs. Sushma Swaraj. We have no more. She has been quite an activist. So registration of marriage as per that bill is a must to hook the husband. Otherwise, he won't disclose his address. If he's a fake person, he won't disclose his address. He keeps on changing the job because he's entirely in a foreign country where green card or permanent residency is very difficult to get in. So you must get the marriage registered. Yes, in a way it is compulsory. And for NRI marriages, it is all the more compulsory. The bill, if it becomes an act, it makes registration compulsory. Moreover, if not an NRI marriage, it is just a marriage in India among couples, most of the state has made registration compulsory. So in a way, if you read section 8 of the Hindu Marriage Act, it is the state government who has to make this law to make registration compulsory. And nowadays, we all should be aware of the fact whether it is performed under Special Marriage Act, that is civil marriage, whether it is performed under Hindu Marriage Act or Christian Marriage Act or Parsi Marriage Act, registration needs to be done. It is compulsory. Yes, it is.
And ma'am, we are here with the last question. It demands your opinion. Ma'am, whenever this question has been posed by Pooja Agarwal, and she's asking, whenever a woman takes or seeks divorce, it is looked upon her that she is committing a crime. So there again, this is a social ostracization that happens. So, ma'am, what would you like to comment on it? Because this is the last question, and I think this issue, as a social issue, is also very disturbing. So, what would you like?
Yes, yes, I completely agree with her because for the last since independence, where people, where women could not think of getting divorced, yes, it is a stigma even today because most of the women from rural background, of course, for educated women or women who has got a technical degree who can stand on her legs, yes, she may fight the situation, but for women of rural India who is facing violence day by day, who's facing harassment day by day, who's facing even dowries, marriage even after marriage day by day, for her, of course, getting divorced or thinking of divorce is next to impossible because in such a society it is very difficult to live in. She's not only being stigmatized, she's taken very easily by men also. I completely agree with her. But does that mean that we should be silent against harassment? Does that mean that we should be silent against dowry deaths and dowry crimes? Does that mean that we should suffer humiliation day by day? Does that mean that we should cry every night and suffer in the hand of alcoholic husband? Does that mean that we should be suppressed for all times and we should be silent spectators? Definitely not. There has to be the bell has to be the question is who will tie the bell in that cat's neck, but someone has to take a lead, and with education background and where equality is one of the main mandates in our constitution, it is better we fight a case, that I should say, because nowadays things are changing. It is not that because of divorce life has come to an end. It has not come to an end. If you have a positive aspect of it, why not you have a life of your own? Life is just a one-time affair. You must enjoy to its maximum limit. And thank you very much.
Ma'am, it has been a wonderful session. I will personally tell you certain things. I have been dealing with cases of family law. Here, what I see, people mostly try to adjust first the woman. Basically, they say that without their husbands, they are nothing. That is in their opinion, they feel that. And later, when they are beaten up, I have seen such crucial cases here. They come for divorce, and the other people really look down upon her. I have seen the family members and all. This is such a it's a very sensitive issue, and I
It's a
think
very agonizing part
right,
also.
right, ma'am. Right, ma'am. I have also seen this one case. I still remember. It was like in the beginning of my career here at Gujarat. There was this teacher who was from a very reputed school, and she was very pretty and everything. She came to the court, and she was asking my senior, like she's going to the like witness box, and if she's asked a question, how should she respond and all. And she started crying, ma'am. That moment I felt that even she was such a strong lady, she
Hmm.
had to witness this. I think this entire process of, ma'am, like a woman is always, they are like pressurized by the society because of this
Yes.
one thing. So
And not only that, you will always hear parents are telling us adjust, adjust. But how long will we adjust?
how long,
Don't
right,
we have a
ma'am?
life of our own? Don't we have an independence of our own? They will never say,
Exactly.
the in-laws will never tell the son to adjust. It is the wife who has to adjust all the time. At least in our generation, I have been hearing so many stories, but then
Right.
younger generations where the girl is also having the equal salary with that of her husband, maybe more. Uh, and then she faces atrocity. It is really a mental agony. It is, the society needs to change, the patriarchal setup
Hmm.
needs to change. And last but not, I have, God has given me just one life to live. Why won't I live in my own terms and conditions? I need to enjoy life. I need to have the right kind of food. I need to have the right kind of education. I need to have a right kind of friend. It is my life, so why not I enjoy my life? Divorce doesn't mean the end of life. Judicial separation doesn't mean the end of life. And our Indian courts, the battle goes on and on. It is for 3 years, then it goes to High Court, then it goes to Supreme Court. You see any case that has has been a landmark case, it must have gone for years, and then only the patriarchal setup of mindset of our judges, who, or the Supreme Court, who has had a beautiful judicial activism, has tilted, has shifted the side, and have given very good landmark cases to the women. But then it has been a long battle, not only for the women, also for the feminist leaders who have fought this battle. I have missed Sushma Swaraj. I wish she would have been alive. Otherwise, this foreign marriage bill, which would have become an act, would have really helped the hapless woman and hook the husband. So, with that note, enjoy your life, enjoy your married life. If not, go and enjoy yourself. Life is just a one-time affair. You have to live on your own terms and conditions and enjoy to the maximum. Thank you very much for a wonderful evening. Thank you, all of you, for hearing me. And thank you, the organizers, for giving me an opportunity to speak on a topic which is very close to my heart. Thank you.
Thank you,
Be
ma'am.
safe.
This was such a wonderful session. Thank you to all the viewers whom we have today. Sangeeta ma'am have been also very close to me because, yes, I was her student, and also today I have this platform where I'm meeting her again. And I'm sure that maybe in the future I'll again get to do a webinar with her. Also, the team has really worked so hard for this part one and part two, and we are surely a success. We have been receiving messages from all the viewers that this was a very informative session. Yeah, ma'am has always been like this, be it our classrooms to this digital platform.